March 23, 1944. Berlin. The Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production. On Albert Speer's mahogany desk lay an unopened folder marked for the minister only secret. Its contents were about to shatter the Third Reich's last illusions. Inside, compiled by what was left of German intelligence after the Abwehr's dissolution, were production figures that would change everything Nazi Germany thought it knew about the war. The gap was so huge, I first thought our spies had messed up a decimal point. But they hadn't. Through the tall ministry windows, Speer could see Berlin's bomb-damaged streets, workers clearing rubble from the latest Allied raid. German factories, even with his impressive production boosts, were on track to make 39,870 aircraft in 1944. He'd presented that number to Hitler with pride just weeks before. Now the folder revealed the truth. America alone, not counting Britain or the Soviet Union, would build 96,000 aircraft that year, nearly 2.5 times as many. But this wasn't just about stats. Intercepted messages, reports from neutral countries, and reconnaissance photos told a bigger story. The United States wasn't struggling to make these planes. They were cranking them out while also building ships, tanks, trucks, and ammunition in numbers that defied belief. The war's outcome wasn't being decided on battlefields. It was being written in factory production reports, reports that would soon force even the most fanatical Nazis to face the truth. They'd taken on an industrial power they never really understood. Albert Speer was the miracle worker of German war production. He'd taken over armaments on February 8, 1942, after Fritz Todt died in a mysterious plane crash. Despite Allied bombing, he tripled German war production. Hitler called him the genius of organization. Goebbels praised him as the man who made the impossible possible. At 39, he was the Reich's youngest minister, an architect-turned-armaments wizard who seemed to break economic rules. His reforms were revolutionary for Germany. He introduced single-shift specialized production, standardized parts, and cut the number of aircraft types from 42 down to just 5 main models. He took control from competing Nazi fiefdoms, streamlined bureaucracy, and used mass production techniques he'd actually learned from studying American car factories back in the 1920s. By late 1943, Speer had every reason to be confident. Ammunition production was up 5-fold, tanks quadrupled, aircraft tripled. Even as Allied bombers turned German cities to rubble, his scattered production system kept weapons flowing to the Wehrmacht. He'd proven that smart organization could overcome material shortages. But in early 1944, intelligence reports started rolling in that shook that confidence. The numbers seemed impossible, the claims absurd. German propaganda had always said America was a nation of jazz musicians and Hollywood actors, weakened by racial mixing and democratic inefficiency. How could such a country make more weapons than the entire German Reich? The awakening started in January 1944. The Luftwaffe intercepted and decoded American production reports meant for the Soviets, sent through Lend-Lease shipments. General Adolf Galland, Inspector General of Fighter Forces, would later talk about these findings with Speer in meetings throughout 1944. According to the reports, America claimed to have built 9,113 aircraft in December 1943 alone. That's nearly matching Germany's entire quarterly production in 1 month. Speer first wrote it off as propaganda meant to demoralize German intelligence. But then proof came from multiple sources. Swedish businessmen, neutral observers, sent reconnaissance photos of endless rows of B-24 Liberators at Willow Run, Michigan. One Swedish engineer, who toured the factory before America entered the war, gave detailed notes. The factory is 2/3 of a mile long and a 1/4 mile wide, the report said. By April 1944, they're making one 4-engine bomber every 63 minutes. They run 2 9-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Do the math. That's nearly 650 bombers a month from just this one plant. Speer studied the photos with a magnifying glass. He saw more than finished planes. He saw the assembly line itself. It was revolutionary. The plane moved through fixed stations instead of workers walking to the aircraft. It was Henry Ford's car-making revolution, applied to airplanes. With the Abwehr absorbed into the SS in February 1944, Speer relied more on alternative intelligence sources. His ministry's departments worked with what was left of military intelligence to assess American production. Swiss businessmen with ties to U.S. companies shared stats from annual reports. Spanish diplomats in Washington sent American newspapers that openly published production numbers. Portuguese merchants reported on U.S. ships they saw in Atlantic ports. Some of the most valuable info came from Japanese naval attachés in Berlin. Throughout 1944, they shared what their embassies in Argentina and Chile had learned. American aircraft were arriving in South America by the thousands, 500 a month just to Brazil, purely for training. Swedish intelligence was especially detailed. Sweden's ball-bearing giant SKF had factories in America, and neutral Swedish executives got tours of U.S. plants. They shared info with both sides to keep Sweden's fragile neutrality. One report described the Pratt & Whitney engine plant in East Hartford, Connecticut, 1,000 engines made every week, testing facilities running 24/7, 40,000 workers, including 11,000 women, and parking lots with 15,000 cars, workers' personal vehicles. In his Berlin office that March, Speer spread all these reports across his conference table. His deputy for fighter production, Karl Otto Sauer, stood beside him with a calculator, checking the numbers. Let's assume these figures are exaggerated by 50% for propaganda, Speer said. Sauer replied, even then, they'd make 48,000 aircraft a year, still more than we do. But the evidence suggested no exaggeration. American newspapers, obtained through neutral embassies, published production stats openly. The New York Times wrote about Boeing's B-29 program without censorship. Time magazine ran articles on Willow Run with production numbers. Life magazine printed photos of assembly lines with visible serial numbers that German intelligence could track. The contrast was stark. In Germany, production figures were state secrets. Workers signed death oaths. Factory locations were hidden. America printed theirs in magazines you could buy at newsstands. The Willow Run file became key to understanding American capacity. Built by Ford in 1941, the facility was everything German production wasn't. The main building covered 3.5 million square feet, bigger than the entire Messerschmitt complex in Augsburg. Swedish engineer Per Jacobson, who toured Willow Run in late 1943, gave a detailed report: 42,000 workers, 35% women, aircraft moving on automated conveyors while workers stayed put, average training time for new hires, 3 weeks. By April 1944, they were making 453 aircraft in 468 hours, one B-24 every 63 minutes. Speer compared that to German production. Germany's main fighter, the Messerschmitt Bf-109, took 4,000 man-hours to build. Workers were skilled craftsmen who assembled entire sections, with 6 months of training on average. At Willow Run, each B-24, a 4-engine bomber 5 times heavier than a Bf-109, required only about 1,225 man-hours for final assembly. Less than a third of the labor. Throughout 1944, Speer met regularly with Hitler at various headquarters. Every time he presented the American production intelligence, Hitler's response was the same: denial and accusations of defeatism. At a May meeting, Speer brought photo evidence from Willow Run and stats from neutral sources. Hitler glanced at the materials. Propaganda, he said flatly.
The Americans want US. Tout believe this fantasy. Nos nations can make aircraft like automobile.
Speer argued back, but that's exactly what they're doing. They've applied automotive mass production to aircraft manufacturing. Hitler cut him off. These are Jewish lies spread by Roosevelt. But other Nazi leaders were starting to face the truth. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, State Secretary in the Aviation Ministry, privately told Speer, "The numbers are correct, aren't they?" Speer replied, "I think they're conservative." Milch said, "Then we've already lost." Back in Berlin, Speer did a detailed analysis of comparative production. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey later confirmed the numbers were irrefutable. Germany's 1944 aircraft production peaked in July at 4,219 planes. Fighter production peaked in September at 3,375. For the year, total aircraft, 39,870, 25,285 fighters, 5,468 bombers, 9,054 other types.
America S. 1944 production.
An average of 8,000 planes a month, 96,000 for the year. That included 16,000 four-engine bombers, 35,000 fighters, and 45,000 trainers, transports, and other aircraft. But raw numbers only told part of the story. Each American B-24 had the firepower of 2 German medium bombers, while using less fuel, crew, and maintenance per ton of bombs dropped. The quality gap made the quantity gap even bigger. Spring 1944 brought more bad news for Germany. Intelligence from Argentina revealed American aluminum production, 420,000 tons a year. Germany, even with control of Norwegian hydroelectric resources, only made 245,000 tons. Oil stats were even more sobering. American refineries produced 4.7 million barrels a day. Germany, dependent on synthetic fuel from coal, made the equivalent of 124,000 barrels a day. The U.S. used more fuel for training flights than the entire Luftwaffe used in combat. Japanese military attaches in Berlin shared a telling observation: your submarines sink American tankers carrying 100,000 barrels of oil. They don't cut back on consumption, they just order another tanker. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial arithmetic. Beyond production numbers, intelligence revealed tech innovations German industry couldn't match. At Wright Field in Ohio, Americans tested aircraft engines in altitude chambers simulating 50,000 feet. Germany's highest test facility only reached 30,000 feet. American factories used statistical quality control, random sampling instead of individual inspection, speeding up production while keeping quality high. The Norden bomb site, recovered from crashed B-17s, showed precision engineering Germany couldn't mass produce. Aircraft designer Dr. Ernst Heinkel told associates, "We're artisans building aircraft. They're industrialists manufacturing them. We can't compete with mathematics."
Intelligence about American shipbuilding drove
Home the point. The U.S. built 2,710 Liberty ships between 1941 and 1945. The famous SS Robert E. Peary was built in 4 days and 15 hours as a publicity stunt, but regular production averaged 42 days from keel to launch. By 1943 to 44, American shipyards were launching nearly 3 ships every 2 days at peak times. German U-boats in the Atlantic reported convoy after convoy of these vessels. The message was clear: America could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. May 1944 brought particular alarm: intelligence about the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Swedish businessmen reported visiting Boeing plants where these superbombers were being made. The specs seemed impossible: 141-foot 3-inch wingspan, 140,000-pound maximum weight, 20,000-pound bomb load, 3,700-mile range, pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets. Production had started in 1943, with 3,970 B-29s built across 4 facilities. Germany's most advanced bomber project, the Heinkel He 277, never got past the drawing board. The B-29 was in mass production, with hundreds already sent to training units. When shown photo evidence, Göring reportedly said, "Nobody can build such aircraft in quantity." But Galland and other realistic officers knew better. As Galland wrote in his memoirs, this wasn't bluff. It was industrial reality. Captured American airmen accidentally confirmed production superiority during interrogations. Their stories revealed a devastating gap in pilot training. American pilots got 250 to 400 hours of flight training before combat, 60 hours primary, 70 basic, 50 to 75 advanced, 75 to 170 transition training. German fighter pilots in 1944 entered combat with an average of 112 hours, down from 160 earlier that year. By 1945, that number dropped to just 50 hours. Fuel shortages meant many German pilots never flew their assigned aircraft until their first combat mission. Technical Sergeant William Barnes, AB-17 crew chief captured after his bomber was shot down, told interrogators, "We lose about 60 bombers a month over Germany. Boeing alone builds 140 a month. We have more bombers than trained crews." June 1944's D-Day invasion showed American material superiority on an unprecedented scale: over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. But Hitler insisted this was America's maximum effort, unsustainable. Speer knew better. Intelligence from Argentina reported American shipyards launching new Essex-class aircraft carriers regularly. Each carrier needed 27,000 tons of steel and carried 90 to 100 aircraft. Germany's only aircraft carrier, the Graf Zeppelin, remained incomplete after 6 years of construction. Dr. Karl Kroch, chairman of IG Farben Supervisory Board, reported through Swiss contacts that America made 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber a year, versus Germany's 120,000 tons. They solved the butadiene production problem that limits our output, he said. They share technology. We guard secrets. They multiply efficiency through cooperation. July 1944, reconnaissance photos of Detroit's industrial complex showed concentration greater than the entire Ruhr Valley. Willow Run covered 1,600 acres, Ford's River Rouge 2,000 acres, Chrysler Tank Arsenal 1,100 acres, General Motors facilities over 5,000 acres combined. Photo interpreters counted hundreds of large factories, thousands of vehicles and parking lots, dozens of power plants, and rail yards handling over 1,000 freight cars a day. August 1944 marked both the peak of German aircraft production and Speer's full acceptance that defeat was inevitable. A comprehensive intelligence summary laid out the stark reality. America's production from January to June 1944, 48,000 aircraft, on track for 96,000 annually, 14,000 tanks, over 300,000 military trucks, hundreds of naval vessels, 5.75 million tons of merchant shipping. Germany's production in the same period, 19,800 aircraft, 9,700 tanks and assault guns, 47,000 military trucks, 193 U-boats, and almost no merchant shipping. American production was speeding up. German production, under strategic bombing, was starting to decline. The oil campaign had crippled fuel production. The transportation plan created bottlenecks that left finished weapons stuck in factories. By late 1944, fragmented intelligence about a massive American project reached German spies. They didn't know it was atomic, but the industrial scale was clear. Reports described facilities using enormous amounts of electricity. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, used 1/7 of all U.S. electrical production, with peak demand hitting 298,800 kilowatts. America was pouring resources equal to Germany's entire V-weapons program into a single project whose purpose was unknown. September 1944 analysis showed the gap between German and American production was more than numbers, it was philosophical. American production focused on simplification for mass manufacturing, interchangeable parts between companies, statistical quality control, and worker specialization. German production emphasized complex designs that showed off engineering skill, unique parts for each manufacturer, individual craftsmanship, and workers as skilled generalists. As Speer later reflected, we built aircraft as works of engineering art. They manufactured them as industrial products. Our Me-262 jet fighter was better, but we could only build 20 a month. They would have redesigned it for mass production and built 200. By November 1944, even Göring couldn't deny American production superiority. The Battle of Leyte Gulf showed American naval power. They deployed more aircraft carriers than Germany had destroyers. At a Luftwaffe conference, Galland presented sobering stats. American fighters outnumbered Luftwaffe fighters 15-1 over Germany. American pilots had 400 flight hours. German pilots had 50. American fighter engines lasted 400 hours between overhauls. German engines only 25. We're not facing one air force, we're facing several, Galland explained. The 8th Air Force alone has 3,000 heavy bombers. Each American Air Force is bigger than our entire Luftwaffe. December 1944's Battle of the Bulge provided the final proof. Even with complete tactical surprise, German forces were overwhelmed by America's response. Within days, the U.S. moved 250,000 men, 50,000 vehicles, and 500,000 tons of supplies to stop the breakthrough. Captured American supply depots revealed abundance Germany couldn't fathom. More supplies in one depot than entire German divisions had. January 1945 brought Speer's most comprehensive assessment. Swiss banking contacts sent American war bond ads that openly stated production figures. Your war bonds have built 300,317 aircraft, 1940 to 1945, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million trucks, 6,500 naval vessels, 2,710 Liberty ships. These numbers would have been state secrets in Germany. America advertised them to sell bonds. On January 30th, the anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, Speer attended what would be his last major conference, trying to convince Hitler to seek peace terms.
Mein Führer, we must face reality.
The Americans produce in 1 month what we produce in a year. Hitler's response showed he was completely detached. Wars are won by will, not production statistics. On March 18, 1945, Speer submitted a memorandum to Hitler arguing Germany's economy would collapse in 4 to 8 weeks. The next day, March 19, Hitler issued his infamous Nero Decree, ordering the destruction of all German infrastructure. Speer responded on March 29, opposing the destruction. The enemy's superiority in weapons and industrial capacity is so great that further resistance is meaningless. The Americans can replace in weeks what we destroy. We can't rebuild in decades. Hitler accused him of treason and defeatism, but by then, he didn't care. Speer had known Germany would lose since mid-1944, thanks to the production stats. April 1945. As American forces closed in on Berlin, intelligence about U.S. production kept coming. A captured Fortune magazine revealed the complete conversion of America's auto industry. In 1941, U.S. automakers built 4.8 million cars. By the war's peak, they were making millions of military vehicles, thousands of aircraft, and tens of thousands of tanks. As the Third Reich collapsed, the production numbers told an irrefutable story. Total U.S. war production, 1940 to 1945, 300,317 military aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million military trucks, 639,000 jeeps, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2.6 million machine guns, 6,500 naval vessels, 2,710 Liberty ships. German war production, 1939 to 1945, 95,000 aircraft, 63,800 tanks and self-propelled guns, 345,000 military trucks, 61,000 artillery pieces, 1.2 million machine guns, 1,171 U-boats. The ratios were overwhelming, 3.2 to 1 in aircraft, 1.35 to 1 in tanks, even with Germany's longer production period, 7.5 to 1 in trucks. And these numbers don't include Lend-Lease supplies sent to America's allies. After the war, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed German intelligence had actually underestimated American production. Germany predicted the U.S. would make 22,440 aircraft in 1944. Actual production was 96,318, an underestimation of 330%. While Speer's memoirs, Inside the Third Reich, focused on his own achievements and relationship with Hitler, in post-war interrogations and interviews, he admitted American industrial capacity was overwhelming. In a 1970s interview, he said, "By early 1944, I knew for sure Germany would lose the war." America's production of 96,000 aircraft in 1944 wasn't a surge, it was sustainable forever. Other German leaders confirmed this. Field Marshal Erhard Milch testified, "When I learned America made 9,000 aircraft in 1 month, I knew the war was lost." Admiral Karl Donitz testified, "When intelligence reported Americans building escort carriers faster than we could build submarines, I knew the Battle of the Atlantic was lost." General Adolf Galland wrote, "Every American pilot we shot down was replaced by 2 more, better trained. We faced not an enemy, but an avalanche." American technological advantages made their numerical superiority even greater. The proximity fuse made anti-aircraft fire 700% more effective. America made 22 million of them. Germany never developed the tech. American radar was mass-produced by the thousands, while German radar was handcrafted in small numbers. Turbochargers gave American fighters a decisive altitude advantage. General Electric made 300,000 during the war. Germany couldn't copy them because they lacked the metallurgy for mass production. The economic gap made German victory impossible. In 1944, America's gross national product was $210 billion. Germany's was $45 billion. America devoted 45% of its GNP to war production. Germany devoted 65%. Yet America's war production exceeded Germany's entire GNP. Historians later noted, America could lose Germany's entire annual production in one battle and keep fighting. They could afford waste that would have crippled Germany's economy. America trained 435,000 pilots during the war. Germany trained 57,000. By 1945, American pilots were fighting German pilots who'd never fired their weapons in training. Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff testified, "We sent children to fight professionals." It wasn't combat, it was execution. Learning about American production superiority created a psychological crisis among German leaders, moving through predictable stages: denial, rationalization, desperation, delusion, and finally acceptance. This affected military strategy, leading to increasingly desperate gambles that speeded up defeat. The greatest irony? American production achieved what German ideology claimed was impossible. Racial integration and gender equality in factories proved more efficient than Aryan supremacy. American factories used diverse workforces, achieving more voluntarily than Germany did with forced labor. In his later years, Speer reflected on the lesson: we confused military prowess with industrial power. We believed racial ideology could overcome numerical reality. We thought will could defeat production. Every assumption was wrong. When I learned they made 96,000 aircraft in 1944, I knew not just that we would lose, but that we'd already lost. The war went on for another year, but the outcome was decided. World War II wasn't won on the beaches of Normandy or in the ruins of Berlin. It was won in Detroit's factories, California shipyards, Seattle's aircraft plants. It was won by workers who never saw combat, but whose industrial might made victory inevitable. Germany challenged the world's greatest industrial power with ideology and courage. We learned that in modern warfare, production is strategy, logistics is tactics, and industrial capacity is victory. America understood that from the start. We learned it too late. Speer's recognition of American production superiority was the moment rational German leaders knew the war's outcome was fixed. The 96,000 aircraft made in 1944 weren't just machines. They were proof of an industrial system working at unprecedented efficiency. Every B-24 rolling off Willow Run's assembly line every 63 minutes showed the systematic superiority of democratic industrial organization over totalitarian control. The production war proved that in modern industrial warfare, the factory floor is just as decisive as the battlefield. When Albert Speer saw America make 96,000 aircraft in 1944, he saw the future, a future where German defeat was certain. America's transformation from consumer goods to weapons of war was the greatest concentration of industrial power in human history. Against that reality, the Third Reich never stood a chance. The story of Albert Speer's realization is ultimately a testament to the decisive power of industrial democracy. In 1944, that nation was undeniably, overwhelmingly, and insurmountably the United States of America. The 96,000 aircraft made that year weren't just symbols of American strength. They were proof that totalitarian ambition will always fall before democratic industrial capacity.